You might not realize it, but a lot of countries right now are suffering from not having enough young people. For us, for example, we're having a huge problem with this because our population is getting older. And that means that there aren't enough young people to do what old people used to do. And that also includes countries like Japan and China. Like, they're suffering a lot from that. But remember, not too long ago, China told everyone to have only one child, and one child only. Like, what was that about China? Oh yeah, that was a mistake of a social experiment. Wait, so how long did you have that policy for? From 1980 to 2015. So 35 years of people allowed to only have one child? Wow. And also, this policy prevented the birth of 400 million babies. And because of that, so many issues came up. So in this video, we'll be explaining what exactly was China's one-child policy and what horrible things came from having this policy. So let's start by going back to the 1950s. And back then, Chinese families had many children, sometimes 5 or 6 or even more. And the government under Chairman Mao Zedong encouraged big families, believing that more people would make the country stronger. But thanks to better healthcare, more babies survived. And people lived longer, so China's population grew very, very fast. It actually doubled from about 540 million in 1949 to 970 million by 1979. But why did they want more children back then? The idea back then was that the more the better for the population, and Mao and other leaders thought that a large workforce would help build the country better. And back then, high birth rates were normal because many children didn't even survive childhood. But as healthcare got better, infant deaths dropped a lot, and life expectancy jumped from 35 years in 1949 to over 65 by the 1970s. But the thing is, China started realizing that having so many children started to come with challenges. And by the late 1960s and 1970s, some Chinese leaders and experts grew worried that overpopulation could hurt China's future. They saw that the population was still growing by millions each year and wondered, like, how are they going to feed and house and educate everyone? So in the 1970s, even before the one-child policy, China introduced a campaign called Later, Longer, Fewer. This was basically a campaign to encourage couples to marry later, wait longer between having children, and have fewer kids. And for them, ideally, 2 kids was the best. And the government even encouraged people to get married at an older age. For example, they told women to get married when they're older than 23, and they told men to get married when they're older than 25. And they even promoted slogans like 1 is good, 2 at most. And all these things were done so that they would decrease the population, and they actually worked. The average number of children that Chinese women had dropped from like 6 in the 1960s to 3 in the 1970s. So families were getting smaller even before the one-child policy. But for China and the Chinese government, that wasn't enough. They believed that even 3 children per family was still too many for China's limited resources. So the Chinese government came up with what they thought was a brilliant idea back then. We were like, hey families, you can only have 1 child now and no more. And this wasn't just like a random idea or a law. It was actually written in the Chinese Constitution, which is the country's biggest rulebook in 1982. And they were strict about it. For example, in cities, it was very strict. Only 1 child per family, no excuses. But in villages, there was a little wiggle room. For example, if the first baby was a girl or had a disability, they might allow one more kid. Yeah, you heard that right. Like, in some situations, if the baby was a girl, they allowed the family to have another baby. Anyways, so if you followed the rules and only had 1 child, you can get bonuses. For example, some families got certificates, some got bonuses at work, and some even got better housing because they only had 1 child. But if you had more than 1 child without permission, you would face heavy fines, like very expensive fines, called social maintenance fees. The fine could be several times the family's annual income. And even contraceptives such as birth control pills or IUDs were made widely available for free, and many women and men were expected to undergo sterilization. And if you don't know, sterilization is a medical procedure that would prevent you from having any more children. And unfortunately, in some cases, local officials did some horrible things. For example, there are some documented instances of women being forced to end their pregnancies. And some women were forced to have surgeries so that they couldn't have any more babies. And propaganda was everywhere with banners and posters telling people to only have one child. There was even a Chinese poster from the 1980s that reminded everyone that planned birth control is everyone's responsibility. But what was the outcome of this? Well, China's birth rate, which is the number of births per 1,000 people, dropped significantly. And in the 1980s and 1990s, the government claims that 400 million births were prevented because of that policy. While some experts say that the number might be lower, but still, there was a huge decline in births. And by the year 2000, the average family size had become so much smaller than it was in the 1970s. But reducing births so quickly created new issues. For example, with fewer children being born, the population began to age. Yeah, now we have a lot of old people, but not many young people. It also could cause a problem called the 4-to-1 problem, which means that one child might end up supporting 2 parents and 4 grandparents in the future, which is a very heavy burden on the younger generation. But under this policy, most urban children grew up as only children in the family. They even had the nickname Little Emperors because parents and grandparents focused all of their attention on that one child. And many of these kids benefited from being an only child. For example, they had a lot of resources for that one kid, for education, for support, for anything. Basically, all the family's attention was on one child only. But there was also a huge problem because in China, they traditionally favored having sons over daughters. And because of this one-child policy, many families wanted their one child to be a boy, not a girl, which caused some horrible things. For example, some parents, when they found out that they were expecting a girl, chose to end the pregnancy hoping that the next try would be a boy. And some others abandoned baby girls or left them in orphanages because they wanted to try again for a boy. And by the 2000s, the ratio of boys to girls was about 117 boys for every 100 girls born in China. But the normal ratio is about 105 boys per 100 girls. And because of this imbalance, many young men were unable to find wives when they grew up because simply there weren't enough women. And another issue that one-child policy had was the loss of a traditional family life. So in the past, it was a common thing in Chinese households to have many siblings and a big extended family for support. But after years of having the one-child policy, many young people didn't have any siblings. They didn't even have any aunts or uncles at all. And this caused traditional family gatherings to become a lot smaller. There was also the horrible issue of unregistered children. So what was this issue? So basically, some families did have a second or a third child, but in secret. But now those children grew up without a legal identity because the families didn't want the government to know that they had more than one child. Because those children didn't have a legal identity, they were unable to go to public school or even get healthcare. But thing is, this one-child policy was supposed to be temporary, like a temporary fix. Yeah, oops, it lasted for 35 years from 1980 till 2015. And because of all the issues that the one-child policy caused, the government was like, all right, let's change that. And in 2015, they allowed families to have 2 children per family. Yeah, there was still a limit. And in 2021, the government allowed for 3 children. Yeah, but the government now didn't really care about this law as much and it became a lot more relaxed. And the government even removed the penalties and fines for couples who have more than 3 children. But guess what? Even though now the policy was removed, young people don't even care to have kids anymore. They're like, kids are expensive, or some people have very long work hours that they can't be bothered to have a kid to look after. Seriously, not having kids is affecting our economy. Well, China, you did cause that. I know. Well, anyways, thank you guys for watching and let me know what topic I should talk about next.